I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Gary Stephenson, an aerospace systems engineer with wide-ranging industry experience at organizations including NASA, United Technologies, Lindquist, Boeing, ITT, and Hughes Aircraft Company. Gary's had a deep interest in gravity modification and advanced propulsion for decades and has published numerous scientific articles on various topics, especially related to the detection and generation of high-frequency gravitational waves. Gary's also a well-established contributor to many authoritative scientific papers by other researchers and is a past participant in notable advanced propulsion conferences such as the 2003 MITRE high-frequency gravitational wave and the 2005 through 2008 ISNPS STAFE Section F conference events. So Gary, welcome. Now that I did the intro, for the audience, actually, today we're not talking about high-frequency gravitational waves.
No, we'll give them a break.
Yeah, we'll give them a break. We're doing UAP. And the reason that I'm so excited is because there is so much happening right now. I mean, mid-2023, but it's all just kind of moving forward.
Seemingly all at once, yeah.
So you have been researching this for an upcoming conference presentation in APAC, and this is an area that you are becoming more and more passionate about. So let me start out by asking, what are your thoughts about the current UAP story as it stands right now?
Yeah, well, it's been very fascinating to see it unfold in terms of the charters of the DoD and NASA seem to be shifting very rapidly. So the two notable things are the AARO Office, the AARO Office, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office that's out of the DoD. And then now we recently, just this past week, had a public hearing that NASA held on their UAP independent study team. So both those are indications that the charters of these organizations are shifting into this area, which I find very encouraging.
Yeah. Well, it's, again, so much movement so fast. So I wanted to back up just a second. In my case, I had thought that UAP were basically cultural mythology until the Nimitz story broke, right? And
Sure.
I've had to revisit and revise my opinions about everything. Now, in your case, you are, again, a highly credible, highly experienced aerospace professional with experience at Boeing, NASA, and many other high trust roles and organizations. How have your beliefs changed over time? And do you think that that reflects kind of a larger shift in the general public perception of this topic?
I do. I mean, when you see dramatic fighter video on, for instance, the Tic Tac sightings from the Nimitz, or the so-called gimbal type UAPs, very, very compelling to look at those. It was debunked that the so-called go fast UAP was actually UAP, or at least there was some doubt cast on that. And I can go into that in a little bit later if you'd like. During the NASA hearing, they showed the geometry didn't support that it was actually going fast. It was parallax from the fighter. The fighter was going fast, and it looked like the UAP compared with the background was going fast, but the actual UAP was actually traveling at 40 miles an hour at 13,000 feet, which winds aloft at 13,000 feet would certainly hit 40 miles an hour. So that particular sighting, I think, can be discredited, at least as a potential balloon. The other two, not so much. The maneuvers observed with Tic Tacs that are, 1,000 G type maneuvers, and the movements of the so-called gimbal UAPs are still very compelling to me. And so I think that has also seeped into the scientific community, and by virtue of wider acceptance across the scientific community, has then empowered advocates of these areas to push government for a greater role in the DoD and in NASA. And then in turn, that all has impact on the general public.
Okay. Well, so new video was leaked this May, right? Just last month. That reportedly shows UAP swarming the USS Omaha off the coast of San Diego in July 2019. This comes after previous video captured on the Omaha showed a UAP diving into the water during the same encounter. If it's okay, let me play these. Okay, so this is radar video from the Omaha showing the swarm of UAP. And again, this was leaked video. And this was also captured on the Omaha. This is the UAP that's diving into the ocean. So what are your thoughts on those new videos? I mean, it seems like we have more coming out here from the Omaha in the same area that the Nimitz incident happened.
Yeah, it's tough based just on the video to make any sense of what's happening there and whether or not it could be conventional drones or whether they're, the classic spherical UAPs. You can't really tell from that screen. I did find the video compelling because it was clearly like intermodal, right? It was in air, then it was in water, and that's been seen before. Certainly, the Puerto Rico UAP incident comes to mind. I forget, it was called Aquadia or something like this. That one was especially interesting because it was so long. It was being captured by a platform that is designed for such a thing, and so they had a pretty good visual track on it. And it not only did it go between air and water, it seemed to do gravitational lensing, where it seems to split apart, which as you pointed out in some of your other interviews, is an indication of gravitational lensing. So these spherical UAPs do seem to exhibit non-standard flight behavior, certainly that is not within our current state of the art.
Yeah.
Although Jack Safadi would like to change that.
Well, so I have a couple more videos here.
Okay.
The next news item, again, this spring summer period is just going crazy. During the AARO Senate briefing back in May last month, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick played a 4-second video of a metallic sphere captured in April 2016 by a surveillance drone. Yeah, the Mosul, Iraq sphere, I think they're calling it the Mosul Sphere. So Vice quotes Kirkpatrick as saying, "We see these all over the world, and we see these making very interesting apparent maneuvers." This is the Mosul Sphere.
Yeah, and it looks very linear there, so it's not super obvious that it's not a balloon. If it was maneuvering, then it would be much easier to indicate that it's a real UAP and not just a balloon floating by.
The spherical objects are very interesting, and I guess to hear Kirkpatrick say that they are being spotted in different areas is even more interesting. And if they're doing maneuvers, again, he said, we see these making very interesting apparent maneuvers.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is kind of a new development in the story.
It could be that we've opened up our apertures after the whole Chinese balloon incident to lower and slower objects. And so now we're picking these things up that they may have always been there, but we have not noticed them before. And because we have higher resolution sensors and we have higher frame rate data, that we can suddenly see them now. So that could certainly be part of it, is the improvement in sensor performance and opening up the sensor windows.
Well, that's it. Actually, that's a really interesting thought, because in general, there are more cameras capturing more footage everywhere, right? And I mean, UFO or UAP encounters in general, these are very rare, but we have so many cameras now, especially with the DoD, right? Like on, surveillance aircraft and things like that. It makes sense that we would be having more of these incidents captured. And I think also it's easier to, quote unquote, leak this footage, right? I mean, someone can use a smartphone and capture, that radar screen. Whereas in the past, it would just be word of mouth and it would, disappear over time, or it would be labeled incredible. So,
right. So it's certainly more compelling than word of mouth. At the same time, from a scientific point of view, it's not as useful as having a very consistent sensor database and having a very consistent collection capability. So that was one of the points that was drawn out during the NASA hearing. Is that if there was a way to get an app on everyone's phone, for instance, that could collect in the same way and then added metadata into that, for instance, on the GPS coordinates that they saw this at the angle of the phone, and have a really consistent data set, that would be of tremendous help in terms of analysis.
Absolutely. Do you think it's possible that these spheres are some kind of a surveillance craft? The reason I ask that is it seems like they're, again, these swarms seem to happen in the same area that the Tic Tac were sighted in. And it seems like the Tic Tac have kind of a similar shape and configuration. So you've got kind of these larger Tic Tac vehicles, if you could call them that, and then you have these smaller spheres, and the spheres seem to be spotted in more locations. Do you think that, I mean, I guess what I'm kind of asking is, do you think it's accurate to say that the Earth is under some kind of surveillance?
I don't know for sure what the correlation. I haven't seen. Of course, there's people looking at the data like Don that might be able to correlate this, but I haven't, just from an ad hoc point of view, been able to make a correlation between things like Tic Tacs and then these potentially surveillance type spheres. I haven't, and also I have not seen the spheres make maneuvers. Me firsthand, I haven't seen the spheres make maneuvers that would indicate they have to be UAPs. They could be of terrestrial origin. It could be man-made. They could be MHD devices, magnetohydrodynamic devices, which can take on non-traditional aeroforms, let's put it that way, because of the way they operate with the surrounding media. And so I can't really rule that out as a possibility that they could be, domestic in origin.
Okay. Well, so I want to start moving towards some of the things that you're going to be presenting about. And one of those is Newsweek reported just yesterday, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense, Chris Mellon, has referred 4 witnesses to AARO who claim to have knowledge about a secret government program involving the quote unquote analysis and exploitation of materials recovered from off-world craft.
Right.
So I don't know.
Certainly we'll have more time in my upcoming talk, June 10th. And I'll be presenting some exhibits of potentially historical data on that. And I will let people draw their own conclusions on whether of the veracity of these documents or whether they're forgeries, clever forgeries. I don't want to tell people what to think, but we'll be presenting all of that next week. I will say that Chris does know a lot of people in the intelligence business, and there seems to be a pattern of compartmentalized information in the intelligence community. And it's certainly plausible that there's a compartment that deals with crash recovery and studying crash recovery remains. And if that's the case, it would make sense to me, just as Chris had said, to more widely disseminate that data, because holding that data too close is not going to be helpful to the wider scientific community. So I think that's Chris's concern, and Chris's point is that it may be held in too small a circle to be of any value, especially considering this may have been going on for some 75 years. I mean, if you believe all of the historical data.
Well, and that's the challenge, actually. And that's
Yes.
one of the things that I'm looking forward to in your presentation. And it's one of the questions that I've been asking myself. It seems like Mellon is starting to connect, again, these modern, like the Nimitz and the Omaha encounters, back to this 75-year legacy of sightings, right? And
other sightings and other encounters, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll remember, I remember quite vividly some of the material that Paul Murad would bring out. In one particular case, there was a UAP potentially apparently attacking an Atlas ICBM and sending it off course with what appeared to be light beams. It almost looked like a cartoon. It looked so unbelievable. Like somebody had like photoshopped it in or something. But this was from 1966, and the people who took the film, at least according to Russ Coulthard's book, In Plain Sight, did not alter it. The generals called him in and say, "Did you alter this film?" He's like, "No, I did not alter this." But it seemed the Atlas had gone off course, and it seemed to be correlated with this visually recorded event of a UAP sending this thing off course. So there's a lot of historical data there that that could be revisited. There wasn't much appetite for that during the last NASA hearing. They said, we're not going to go back and look at grainy images. Our charter is to, going forward, what do we want to do? How do we want to have NASA contribute going forward? And what can NASA do that the AARO cannot do? But certainly working together, the AARO still has the charter now for instance, dispositioning FAA reportings. If something's reported now through the FAA, it's going to go to the AARO. We didn't even have that in place even 5 years ago, even probably 3 years ago. So this is a very encouraging development, and this will help going forward. There is always the residual question about how much happened in the past, and how much is it worth going back and looking at that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad to see NASA moving forward and becoming more public. I think AARO is a tremendous step forward. The secrecy doesn't squash this. I think it just breeds rumors. In NASA's case, two of the things that I've seen are, obviously, number one, every time they send back a photo of Mars, there are people analyzing every odd-shaped rock,
Sure.
saying, "Look, that's an artifact of X,
Right,
Y,
right.
or Z." So that's part of it. But I think the other part too is, people see bits and pieces of stuff floating around in space, and they're like, okay, that's a UFO, and it turns out it's a tile from the shuttle or a piece of foam, or so that's not to downplay the possibility that those things exist. It's just that NASA has had its hands full with people kind of second guessing what they do. And I think part of that is because people feel like there's this veil of secrecy that really probably shouldn't be there.
Yeah, and Scott Kelly did kind of try his best to dispel that during the Q&A period during the NASA hearing last week. When they asked him, hey, what are you guys hiding? He's like, literally the whole time I was at the astronaut office at Johnson Space Center, there was never a single discussion about UAP, not one. So we'd have to sign like an NDA saying never talk about UAPs. This didn't happen, at least at Johnson. And we're very open about everything that we do at the astronaut office. That being said, of course, he didn't speak to other centers. Other centers, right? So other centers have open recs for people who have clearances. They're like, we want people who have clearances. So why is that, right? So that's where the rumors get started, is when they're working in classified areas or supporting potentially our military or intelligence community with activities, that can lead people to think, oh, they're hiding UAP things at NASA, even if those centers are hiring classified people for some other reason. It gives the misimpression that they're hiding UAP or some other material related to UAPs, which may or may not be the case, right?
Yeah.
But Scott Kelly at least put his reputation on the line and said, no, I've never heard of anything like that at NASA.
Well, let me drop a statistic real quick, and then I have kind of a quick anecdote as well. So
Okay.
Pew Research Center polls indicate that trust in government, this is kind of across the United States government, is down from a high of 77% in 1964 to approximately 20% in 2022. One thing that I've wondered is how these current revelations about UAP affect that, especially considering, all the history, I guess, that it brings to light. And then I guess as a corollary, and this isn't in my questions, but I think probably you and definitely I have lots of contacts in the defense establishment. And what I found is people who are in positions of trust who probably should know if these programs exist or have ever existed have been asking. They ask each other quietly, right? They're like, well, something might be going on. Maybe it's those guys. Maybe they know. And so it seems like definitely public trust is way, way down. And it seems like even within government, nobody's exactly sure who knows what, where,
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's an unfortunate side effect of sometimes we get like this echo chamber kind of situation where one channel is saying something and another channel is saying something completely different. And there's very little overlap. It's like, what do you do with that? And then the internet mirrors that too. It's not just I can't just blame cable news for this, right? There's this whole different worlds out there. And then, so one example is, okay, the DOE supposedly has a Q clearance, cleared for weird. Okay, and then somebody supposedly leaks data out of that Q clearance, so that becomes a QAnon, and that becomes a whole conspiracy thing all of its own, because of the secrecy, because people don't know what to make of it.
Yeah. Well, and this takes us back to the chicken and egg thing, right? I mean, because there's this secrecy, because people feel like things are being hidden, then
Right.
they draw conclusions and they ignore counterfactual evidence,
Sure.
and that leads
Yeah.
to stuff like Pizzagate. That was one, or
Yeah.
Lord knows what's on Hunter Biden's laptop, if anything. And I mean, we have all these ongoing issues that kind of come about because we live
Unfortunately,
in
yeah.
this sea of unknowns, so
Yeah.
it seems like there's a real trust issue, and I'm hoping that AARO as well as NASA can help to
Let's hope
restore
so. Yeah, I mean, I applaud their efforts to try to get some more publicity on this. So NASA has stated, we want only to deal with unclassified data because we want international partners, we want public engagement, and so they're going to only work with the unclassified data. However, they did say, and Sean Kirkpatrick underscored, that just because data is classified doesn't mean the object that they're looking at is classified. It could be to protect the collection capability. They gave the example of the Statue of Liberty. There may be a collection capability that takes the picture of the Statue of Liberty. That doesn't mean the Statue of Liberty is classified. It just means that picture of it is, because our collection capability is so good that you can see so much detail in the Statue of Liberty that you don't want your adversary to know how good it is. And so that is one thing that unfortunately does lead to security classification issues, and is one of the reasons why they have a classified, the AARO at least has a classified session and then an unclassified session to separate out what they can share and what they feel like they can't share. But NASA has already said flatly that they're not going to do that approach. They're only going to deal with the unclassified data to keep it as open as possible, which I applaud.
Okay. Now, I wanted to ask about, I guess, the big question here, which is that AARO and NASA, neither one of these organizations are calling UAP extraterrestrial. But
Right.
I just saw a presentation by Dr. Gary Nolan at the ISALT conference, and he recently talked about, look, these things demonstrate capabilities that appear to be far beyond contemporary human technology.
Right.
From everything I've seen, there's no way that human design technology could develop these. I mean,
in some instances, I tend to agree with you. I mean, and some of the things they've been uncovering at Skinwalker Ranch, in terms of the spectrum being emitted by some of these phenomena, and the appearances and the impact on the contactees, if you will call them that, seem to be not just physical but also psychic impressions. And so there could be a psychic impact of this. We call it an information layer that's sort of beyond just the XYZT spatial temporal domain. So this could be a multi-domain type encounter that we're seeing. And Jack Fillet, if you believe his books, he insists that you have to understand the psychic component of this to understand the phenomenon in its entirety.
Yeah.
So that then brings up the question: is it purely extraterrestrial, as in from another different XYZ planets, which was initially, I think, probably the initial reaction in the late 40s or early 50s, that these have to be somewhere else, or are they something that's always been here, or are they something that crosses into our dimension from a different dimension? We don't know about that. Well, I thought a really good summary on this was presented by Hal Puthoff in his ultra-terrestrial paper. And that's one of the ones I was going to mention at next week's talk. And it'll be at one of the exhibits we want to present. Again, so that I will not tell people what to think, but they can read it and they can make up their own mind about how plausible is it that these things come from some other dimension, some information space or probability space. Remember, I sent you a paper not too long ago summarizing Burkett-Heim theory. And Heim, of course, was an early unified physicist, unified field theory type physicist in Germany that worked independently to try to unify all the fields, electromagnetic and gravity and so on. And he created, in order to unify them, information spaces and probability steering spaces, he called them. So if that has any reality at all, and we're thin on any proof of Heim theory. But is it possible that these things come from information space, from some probability space? I think also of the work of David Maker, where he talks about a fractal universe. Are these coming from a different piece of the fractal universe and crossing into our own fractal domain? Or even string theory that talks about brains, these membranes or brains. Is this something on a parallel brain that's teleporting into our own into our own universe? So there's so many options that I don't think you can purely say, hey, it's got to be extraterrestrial, as in somewhere else in space, or time travelers, as in somewhere else in time. It could be way more complicated than that, and we just don't have the physics understanding to fully define what this interaction is or where it's coming from.
Okay. Well, so another thing that Gary Nolan had talked about, and I think that you're going to be talking about this as well, is the fact that these things appear or may have been here for a very long time. Some have speculated that they may have been here for tens of thousands of years, just kind of quietly doing their thing, right?
And maybe
Studying our
not here
planet.
the entire time, but interacting for that period of time, briefly popping in and popping out. But we may have experienced a very long history of interactions. We don't know that for sure. But when you look at the archaeological evidence, I mean, the whole Chariots of Fire, right, mythology is based on that. It's based on we've had these interactions with some form of non-terrestrial, ultra-terrestrial, or extraterrestrial beings for a very long time. And what I really like about Gary Nolan's work is the work he's done studying what may be artifacts, like crash artifacts, and finding different isotope mixes in those crash artifacts than is occurring in our solar system. It's like, why would someone go to the trouble of doing a different isotope mix in this crash remain? Or is this from some other version of our universe that has a slightly different isotope mix for a particular element? That's an open question, but there's no denying that he's seen different isotope mixes for some of the elements in these crash remains. So I thought that was, because that's scientific data, that's very compelling.
It's intriguing also to see all of this starting to kind of come forward into the public spotlight all at once, right? I mean, again, it's been, rumor, myth, and legend for decades. And in my case, it was easy to write it off. It was say, this is just people telling stories. They saw
right.
it,
So as we get more data, it's not as difficult, not as easy to write it off anymore, right? It's like, well, how do you explain the isotope thing? I mean, how do you explain a tic tac or a gimbal thing? But the go fast we've kind of explained, but what about the other sightings, And so as we get more open about sharing some of this more anomalous data, I think it becomes more compelling, and it's easier to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't dismiss this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and going back to, the technology beyond human capabilities, right? One of the things that stuck in my mind was with the Nimitz encounter, that these things apparently set off the space-based missile defense system, right, up in orbit, and presumably descended down to, several hundred feet, I guess, within a matter of seconds. I think Kevin Newth estimated that they could have pulled thousands, potentially up to 5,000 G.
If they didn't have, gravitational warp drive, then yes, you would. But with the warp drive, you wouldn't feel any G-force at all in the inside of the craft if they have a true warp drive, and that would also protect them from atmospheric reheating, right? So that would be consistent with that, and I think that's why Jack Sarfati is focused so much on saying, hey, this has got to be some kind of warp drive. It just matches the facts. And it also matches kind of the blue shift we've seen in some of these thermal images where it's like, these things seem to be colder than normal. Well, how is that happening? Well, that could happen with blue shift. So that's another interesting angle.
It is. And as you mentioned, again, not just the speed, not just the G's, those G's, I mean, for the uninformed, right? I mean, not only would they kill any pilot instantly, which I think everyone can probably guess, they would also destroy any airframe. And as you've mentioned, the kind of speeds required to attain those, the ablation itself would destroy these things without some kind of shield, right? So, and then adding in, I mean, Again,
And then the transmedium behavior, it's like, it's not just space to air, it's also air to water. It doesn't seem to bother them
yeah,
from a transmedia point of view. Yeah.
space to air, air to water, potential gravitational lensing. Again, going back to the Aguadilla
Yeah.
video.
The Puerto Rico, sighting was so compelling in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think it's likely? I mean, do you foresee AARO or some office? I mean, I don't know how you would describe it, but at some point, it seems like an authority figure would need to just call this and say, look, this isn't Russia. This isn't China.
Yeah, I think we're close to that. I think if you believe Chris Mellon, that there are a handful of whistleblowers who are ready to come forward if they're offered protection. And I think that protection may soon be in place from a congressional point of view, giving the AARO authority, the AARO Office authority, to offer that protection to whistleblowers who have been in the crash retrieval and study business, to say, hey, come forward and share with us what's going on in this area, because your leadership is not acknowledging what's happening. And number one. Number two, doesn't have sufficient oversight where they have to. And so how do we fix this problem? And by the way, where's the money coming from? I mean, if this is government funded, the findings that they're making should belong, rightfully so, to the American public, because the American public is funding their efforts. So that's just one argument for more openness. The other issue is going to be, I liked, you had a recent interview where you talked about a historical reckoning, and we had an email exchange on this too. There's going to be significant not just financial, there's significant legal overhang associated with some of this unacknowledged and wavered activities that have been wavered to oversight and potentially not received any official green light to proceed the way they have. And so from a legal point of view, have they exceeded their legal authority? I mean, this puts in, I mean, there are so many questions about that, right? That we hear stories about, agents from our government supposedly approaching people saying, don't talk about, this is witness tampering. Don't talk about this. Witness tampering, witness intimidation has occurred potentially. The gross negligence of the facts, which ask Fox how that went for them. I mean, that's a legal problem for them. If they have been making it look one way and really they know they have the facts that know the opposite is true, then there's this disinformation campaign that's potentially highly illegal. So all these activities have to be examined. Certainly, if anybody would ever come to me and say, you can't talk about what you've seen, I'd be like, who the heck are you? I need your badge number so I can call the FBI. Because this is something for the Justice Department. If these people are acting outside the authority and purporting, they could be imposters. They could be saying they're from the government when they have no authority to say that. So that's also a federal crime. So there's potentially 75 years of federal crimes here that have been committed that have to be dispositioned somehow in our legal system. And so that could be one of the big hangups with opening this area up.
Yeah, absolutely. Although on the flip side, one of the things that I think we may see, one of the things that I certainly hope for is I think that this issue is so much larger than simply, is something in our airspace. I mean, it's absolutely larger than, our pilots being endangered. I think that this goes to some of these classic science fiction themes of people like Clarke and Heinlein and, James P. Hogan about defining and redefining humanity's place in the universe. And,
Sure. Yeah, sure.
And one of the things that I've wondered about is, and perhaps you could speak to this, do you think that we might be near a tipping point where the public starts to actively look at that? And again, we're going to have to revisit all of these things, but my thought would be that it would impact arts and culture and philosophy, definitely technology, right? I mean, simply knowing that a warp drive is possible could spur
certainly would impact how we behave. Yeah. And there's an argument to be made that the phenomenon is trying to do that. And the secrecy is to prevent it from doing that too quickly or something like this. So there's a debate there about that. I don't know where I stand on that. I haven't looked at that aspect that much in terms, I'm not a anthropologist or a sociologist. So I'm more of a technologist. So I can't really, but you should have some interviews with some sociologists and anthropologists to ask those questions, because it would be very interesting to see, say that we do decide, these crash remains should be public. What's the impact on society of that? And certainly I'm not the right person to address something like that as a technologist.
Absolutely. Well, Gary, let me thank you so much for
Sure.
your time today, and thank you for all your input. So let me close by asking what you anticipate or guess we may see in the near future. Do you think we'll be seeing new evidence, over the remainder of this year? And again, do you think that there may be some kind of a tipping point in the near future where, where AARO, potentially maybe the DoD, starts to discuss this
Certainly,
more in
AARO's on a
terms
different time frame than NASA, so I would expect with the whistleblowers they have, if they have rock solid protection in place for them from a legal whistleblowing point of view, that they can speak out, then that would be a huge tipping point, right? That they could essentially out the crash retrieval activity that allegedly is going on. That's number one. Number two, very long term, NASA has indicated they're going to come out with their final study by the end of July on arguing what can we do going forward to put in place better collection infrastructure so that we can get a handle on the UAP phenomenon from a scientific point of view. They want to study it scientifically, not look at old collections of images, but really put into place real sensors with better revisit times. It was quite clear from the FAA testimony that we don't have the collection capability right now to go after these things, because all of our collection is designed for regular aircraft. So we're missing the boat here. We're not seeing the whole picture. And NASA's charter is going to be, how can we fill in and do a better job on collection so that we can really understand what's happening before we understand how can we make our airspace safer. So I think that I'm very encouraged by that, but that's a longer term thing. I think if there's a tipping point coming, it's probably coming from the AARO first, from the AARO office with these whistleblowers. So we'll see what happens in the fall hearings cycle.
Wonderful. Gary, thank you again so much
Thanks,
for your
Tim.
time today, sir.
Appreciate it. We'll talk next week.